Good evening. That's why I didn't hear you the first time this mic wasn't on. Welcome, first of all, to Proctor's, and I love this little theater. My name is Gretchen Hathaway. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Union College, and this is a joint evening of dialogue brought to you by Union College, St. Rose College, and Proctor's Theater. And we are really staged this program in order for us to have a really good dialogue tonight. As you may know, today, a decision will be coming down. Probably while we're sitting in this room, a decision might come down. And if something does happen, pull your ear or yank my arm and let me know if a decision has been made. But when we think about what's happening in today's world, and we think about the film that we're going to talk about in a couple of clips that you're about to see, you will probably start thinking, has times changed? You will probably start thinking about some of the negative that's going on in our world. And I want us to also think about some of the positive things that are happening. But tonight we're going to have a dialogue specifically about this. And I think this is probably the first ever in Schenectady County that such a diverse group of people are coming here to dialogue about something as serious as race, culture, film, and choices of film. And I think it's necessary. And I think that both St. Rose and Proctor's, the reason why we came today was to allow this opportunity for dialogue. So I thank you for coming. I will also say that you might have a question that you think you don't want to be the one to pose it, but you want the question answered. So I will be coming around with index cards to pass to you for the question and answer. But if you're bold enough to want to get into the conversation, go right ahead and raise your hand. I noticed that we have some young people here, and they may not want to raise their hand, or they may be the most powerful folks that will raise their hand and put their hands up high, all right? So I thank you for coming. I also want to say that we are here with some dynamic, professional people who understand film and history and how people work and how people think and arts. So you have the pleasure of really getting to know a unique group of folks who've never worked together until this program, except at their own institutions. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Shay Butler, who's Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at St. Rose. Shay?
Thank you, Gretchen. And again, welcome. We are very excited to host this conversation this evening, and we invite you, as my microphone gets adjusted.
A little closer.
Thank you. And we invite you all into tonight's conversation. So I'd like to begin by just saying that I'd like to give a special thanks to Dr. Stephen Ainley, President of Union College, and Dr. Carolyn Stefanko, who's President of the College of St. Rose. Neither could be here this evening, but they do send their regards. Dr. Stefanko did send an ambassador to us, and I see him sitting right there out back, McGuire Gordon, more affectionately known as Mac to those of us at St. Rose, is married to the president of the College of St. Rose, and he's also in the film and movie industry. So Mac, thank you for coming tonight, and welcome. So I have the wonderful responsibility of hosting a conversation, and that's what I'm going to do amongst an august body of professionals and scholars, and I'm just going to begin by introducing them to you. Full bios are in your program, but I wanted you to know a little bit about them and be able to associate the face with a little summary. So I'll begin with Dr. Deidre Butler, to my right. Deidre is a talented scholar, professor, advocate, spouse, and mother. She is an associate professor at Union College. Her academic research focuses on the roles of African American women within contemporary families and representations of Black religious and community activism. As part of her research interests and advocacy, she traveled to Ferguson, Missouri to observe community reactions to the death of Michael Brown. A resident of the city of Schenectady, we welcome Deidre's insights from her active research. So, thank you, Deidre. Thank you. Dr. Risa Fawcett. She is the author of Race, Migration, and Port City Radicalism, West Indian Longshoremen and the Politics of Empire, a teacher and a scholar. In her role as Associate Professor of History at the College of St. Rose, Risa's lectures bring history to life for her students in a way that reflects her passion as she lectures on the thematic focus of her work, which is on slavery, the post-emancipation exploitation of Black labor, the Great Migration, and the political activism of the dispossessed. Now I invite you to meet Philip Morris, a well-known leader and patron of the arts in the Capital Region. He's the CEO of Proctor's. This is the venue hosting us tonight. And through his vision of impacting the region's education and economic development and civic engagement, Philip has raised over $40 million in funds to assist Proctor's in achieving its mission of educating and impacting the community through connecting students to dynamic opportunities categorized by arts, programming, impacting English, history, and science curriculums. Advantageously positioned Proctor's at this cutting edge of the intersection right here in Schenectady of the arts and public life. The Proctor's model is collaboration for mutual benefit with the belief that we are only as strong as our neighbors. Then we have Bowen Suchek. Bowen's a filmmaker and educator who brings practitioner's expertise to tonight's conversation from both industry and an education lens. He uses digital film and media to promote expression, communication, and connection. He has produced, directed, and edited several short documentary films and co-directed Free to Learn. Bowen is the founder and program director of Youth FX, a summer filmmaking program for inner-city teens based out of the Grand Street Community Arts Center. Bowen has been on the road promoting his most recent film feature, which is a full-length documentary titled The Throwaways. I've seen it, and it's amazing. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. And last but not least, we have Liz Richards, another industry expert, scholar and teacher. She's a filmmaker and video installation artist who holds a BA in cultural anthropology, an MA in women's studies, and an MFA in film. She has worked in television and web production at WGBH in Boston for the PBS History Series, American Experience, and in 2009 she was presented the Award of Excellence in Filmmaking by the Pittsburgh chapter of the international organization Women in Film and Media. We are blessed to have her at St. Rose as a visiting professor. She currently teaches production at the college, and she has had over 60 national and international screenings of her work in such places as Japan, Serbia, Germany, Sweden, Finland, and France. Fresh off her honeymoon last week, I say congratulations and welcome to Liz. So we are going to move right into the conversation, but before we begin, we wanted to share a film clip with you for those of you who may not have had an opportunity to see the film recently, or maybe you've never seen Birth of a Nation. So to sort of paint the picture and establish some context for you, we wanted to show 2 clips to start, and then we'll show a third later on. So I'm going to ask that we roll clips 1 and 2, and just to set it up for you, the first clip is on the Reconstruction era, and the second clip is in the legislature right after the passing of legalization of interracial marriage. So with that, please roll clips 1 and 2. Okay, so as many of you are aware, the film was screened here back in October, and it did not have a contextual conversation. So we're going to launch tonight's conversation by giving the film some context, and then we, using the background and expertise of the panelists, and then we're going to open the conversation up to you, the audience, to ask questions, to make comments, and add to the context as well as about the film itself, as well as what's going on in our nation and our region today as it relates to what we've seen in the film. So I'm going to begin by asking Dr. Fawcett Risa to just give us some understanding historically what was going on when this film was created in the U.S.
Well, as is stated inside your program, David Wark Griffith released this film in 1915, and he timed its release because it was the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, and there were a great deal of celebrations that were taking place throughout the nation over this historic event, and this film basically helped to cast that era and to tell the story and to frame the way in which America looked not only at the Civil War, but particularly the period that followed the Civil War. David Griffith's film is based on the book The Klansman that was written by Tom Dixon. Thomas Dixon wrote a series of books, and he wrote during an era where there was an outpouring of literature that was very concerned about the decline of Anglo-Saxon civilization. And you would see novel after novel coming out. People were very concerned that white women were not having enough babies, and they were concerned that these inferior racial types, the blacks in the South, the Indians in the West, even the immigrants that were pouring in from the southeastern part of Europe, would overrun America with inferior stock. And so this is a type of book that Dixon wrote. And basically, he writes this book that glorifies the KKK and talks about how the Klan saved the day by putting the Negro in his place. And it was based on this premise that Griffith made this film. When Griffith made the film, he went further than just to frame this as his story. He presented it as fact. He quoted parts of Woodrow Wilson's publication. Woodrow Wilson, who had been president of Princeton University, went on to become president of the United States, and he had published a book on American history. And what D.W. Griffith did in order to legitimize this film and to present it as an authentic retelling of the period after the Civil War was that he quoted Woodrow Wilson extensively, saying that the historian was on his side. So when audiences went to see this film, and you have to remember, this film was the most watched film of that era. It was shown to millions of people. Wilson invited D.W. Griffith to show the film at the White House. Audiences were being told that this film was based on historical fact, and they reacted in all kinds of ways. When they viewed the scene where the white actor in blackface is chasing the white woman, trying to subdue her. In some towns and cities, people stood up and pulled their pistols and fired at the screen. The Klan membership went up overnight. The KKK began showing the film to recruit, and the Klan would reach a level in the 1920s that was far beyond, in terms of membership, its original size in the 1860s. African Americans also responded. W.E.B. Du Bois, Kelly Miller, the novelist Sutton Griggs denounced this film. But at the heart of this is how African Americans, particularly how African American men, were represented to the general audience. And these images have become a haunting part of the legacy of this film. So with that, I guess we'll move into more commentary and then discussion.
I'd like to deepen our understanding about some of the conflict that arises out of this film. It was screened to much acclaim, not just here, but throughout its history, about being art, one of the best films of all times. So I'm going to ask you, Philip, Liz, and help us understand that. How could a film of this nature be called art, and how does it remain on the American Film Institute's top 100 list?
Well, I think at the time, in 1915, there were very few, first of all, feature-length films, 70 minutes or more. So this was considered a huge technological achievement in that it took thousands of feet of film, but it was also considered a real cinematic and artistic achievement because, prior to this, you would see a shot play out in one take. One of the first widely viewed films was by the Lumiere brothers in 1895, and it was of a train entering a station, and people flocked to see that. And up until this point, up until the teens and then even past it, much of the films that people were viewing we were very literally distanced from the action. It played out as it would in a theater, and we just watched things, in one long take. And what's considered very artistic about what D.W. Griffith did was he moved in closer. We were actually able to see people's expressions, and I think it's a really different experience to read what people think of a group of people, but then to see it, to have a visual. And this is the first, imagination and illustration of visual illustration of racism, and it served as the basis for it. And even if there are people who might not agree with it, sometimes it's just kind of human nature that we see these images and we will believe them. So that's one thing. And another is that another huge technological and creative and narrative advancement that Griffith is heralded for is that he created parallel action. So we see it in the clip where the woman is running away and eventually throws herself over the cliff. She's running away from this man who says he wants to marry her, and her white hero is simultaneously chasing her, and that's a way to build up the tension. That hadn't really been done before. Griffith is the person who brought that to cinema in this country. And I think that's probably, the reason it's remained on this list is probably because it is still considered the first to do these things, regardless of content.
Philip?
Well, not an expert at film, but certainly I know that art and propaganda have gone together forever. Be it looking at the propaganda of the United States, the propaganda of Russia, the propaganda of any place. And that art is in a position always to take a message and make it more public is kind of the experience that we have in all societies with art. So when it was on the list, we were doing the list. We've actually merged two lists to make a film 110 probably, I think it is, or something like that, because there was two different AFI lists, and we've been doing it for a year and a half with a goal of finishing them all up in the next year and a half on Monday nights. One is across the hall, and Dr. Zhivago is across the hall right now in the main stage. Certainly we knew that this caused much anxiety 100 years ago, but we were surprised it caused anxiety again, and we were happy to have some kind of resolution and next step to it, which this represents, and we think there may be other things that we'll be doing to follow up on it.
Okay. Bao and Deidre, let's talk about the impact today in relation to this film. How has it affected media? What's going on in society that still resonates, the reverberations?
What's interesting to me is the clip that we saw of the Reconstruction era, and the men that were representing the newly elected senators, and the strivings of African people to be part of the political process, and how that was made a joke, a farce in the film, and that the audience really believed that. So the idea of black men in particular, black women as well, but black men in particular as being docile, buffoonish, Uncle Tomish, became an ingrained image that we saw through film in the 20th century, and I would argue into the 21st century. And also the scene where the woman jumps off the cliff that we saw, how she was being chased, he was actually trying to say, marry me, let's have an honorable situation. She was in frenzy and jumps away because it's the black brute, the scary, I may be raped or assaulted in some way. So that established that stereotype. And I would say that stereotype is still with us. And it's ingrained in our political and judicial system with our prison industrial complex topics and issues, and what we're waiting for to hear about today. The image of the black brute placed on black men the majority of the time, and that's just seen as the normal for us, even though it's constantly challenged. I always think about Denzel Washington, Halle Berry winning their Oscars some 10 years ago now. Their roles were kind of connected to this film. The black woman being over-sexualized in Monsters Ball, and in The Birth of a Nation, they have the Jezebel type of character betwixt and between over sex that's there, that gets that imprint. But definitely Denzel Washington, as magnificent as his performance was in Training Day, it's still embedded in the black brute, violent, conniving male, and that image is an extension of this. So this film really imprinted three major images of how African people are displayed through images and through media.
Bowen?
Yeah, I think for me, when I first saw this film, probably about 20 years ago now in college, I was just kind of wondering why it was a classic, because I just thought it was kind of a poorly made film, and that it was so overtly racist, I couldn't believe that it was considered a classic. And then sort of, starting to piece together some of the more technical achievements that the film had. But I think it's impossible to separate it from its context, because I think, to me, it's not a surprise that Birth of a Nation was the first feature film to travel across the country and be shown to so many audiences, because in some ways it was sort of an ode to white supremacy, and it sort of cemented in the collective imagination of the country at that time, which was sort of grappling with this 50-year anniversary, where you had people who, they wanted to go back to the good old South. There was a lot of apologists for slavery at that time, and there was people that were absolutely against black people in this country having equal rights. They did not have equal rights. There was, all sorts of laws being passed that basically reinstated slavery, by another name, and I think that this is important to think about in the context of the film, because to me, I've always viewed, as a filmmaker, I've never seen myself as somebody that has any interest in making, a blockbuster film. And that's not why I got into film. I got into film to tell stories, and I think that Birth of a Nation to me is the perfect film that sort of, shows you where Hollywood is really at. I mean, Hollywood to me is about maintaining the power structure in this country, and I think it's about, sort of, sending out these mass messages about what the power structure would like people to sort of think. And there's no more evidence than, as we see, this is, 100 years later, a film is about to be released called Exodus, and maybe some people know about this film. Ridley Scott, who is a major Hollywood filmmaker. This is not some, low-budget film. This is a film that probably has a $100 million budget. The story of Egypt, and Moses, and all the main characters are white. And there are some black characters in the film. They are the thieves, the assassins, the slaves. So once again, here it is, and there is a boycott Exodus campaign happening, but the reality is Hollywood has always been in the service of the white supremacist legacy of America, and I think it's important for us to be honest about that, which to me, this day and age, to me, with Ferguson and with what's happening, around this country, around issues of race, the veil is being lifted, and I think, a lot of people have talked about this for decades, for maybe centuries, but it's about time that we have this conversation and be real about it, and that's my perspective about Birth of a Nation, is that, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was a mass form of propaganda, and it worked.
Okay. All right. We are going to invite the audience into the conversation in just a moment. We just want to show this final clip, and then we're going to open it up. So can you please roll the third clip? Okay, thank you for that. So this clip is a depiction of an attempt to vote. And we thought that it would be appropriate to use to launch the conversation about black citizenship. And how is it still being suppressed today? How is it still being suppressed today? So we can start the dialogue there, or you can respond to some of the conversation that's already happened, because I did see some hands up. So you can address the black citizenship, or you can...
And I ask that you use the mic because we are actually taping the conversation. So I'll start here and then I'll hit there.
Good evening. I'm Sandy Powell. I'm not representing anybody except good common sense. I want to go back to context. I do appreciate the people that are on the panel tonight. I know this is probably not an easy thing for you to do, but I do think it's a bit disingenuous for proctors to not admit that the only reason this conversation is taking place is because people were pissed off, and that there was a strong reaction from the community. There were protests, there were petitions, and if we want to say that this is art and let's invite the community into a conversation about this film and the importance of a film like this in the history of America and how it may have changed or may have remained the same, then this conversation should have happened the night that that film was released. Because I don't know how many of you were here that night, but I suspect that most of the people who came that night are not at this conversation. So they don't have the benefit of the rich discussion that's going to go on tonight. And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this, but I'm saying as part of the context of setting this up as to why we're doing this, let's tell the truth. Let's tell the truth.
Thank you. Philip, would you like to respond?
I think I said that we didn't expect and we would have done this before. We were naive to it in some ways, and I apologize for that, certainly. And I'm glad that we're able to do it now, and I hope that it has a continuing opportunity to influence our lives together.
Yeah, I will say Union got involved, St. Rose and Union got involved because we heard from the community. I think the best part about all of this are the conversations that Phil and Shay and I will be having after this. We've already planned a couple of things, especially for our youth. What was the young man you said we're going to be working with, Phil? Neville, is he here? There he is. Neville, we're going to be working with you because we want to hear from the young people as well. So although it may have caused a lot of angst in our community, this is an opportunity for us to turn this boat around, turn the ship around.
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not going to get into an argument, but the fact is that you had information that people were upset about this prior to this, and you made an artistic decision to continue to show this film. So I understand you're saying, oh, if we had known, we would have. Well, you did know, and you chose to show it anyway without this kind of preparation.
Mm-hmm. And we are filming, and tonight's talk will air on Open Stage Media, and perhaps, and I don't know, Philip, there's a way for those who were in attendance that evening to either receive a copy of tonight's talk or a link, perhaps a video link, so that, oh yes, okay, so that they will be able to be privy to the conversation and the follow-up as some sort of remedy as well. Okay.
Hector Ramirez, concerned citizen. I wanted to go back to the discussion of the brother that brought up around the propaganda of this movie, and I was surprised that no one really has brought up yet the impact that this movie had with respect to minorities and people of color, with respect to promoting and glorifying this country's biggest domestic terrorist and probably the representation of the worst of American race relations, the Ku Klux Klan. And so it's a two-part question. The question for my experts is, should anything ever be glorified when you know that the movie actually was the cause of blood, pain, death, and suffering of a group of people? And the question then for Phil is, from an educational perspective, can you understand that when you made the decision to focus on the cinematic value of the movie, you basically said to me and to a lot of people of color that you valued that more than what that movie did to us and continues to do to us based on what we know what happened with the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not going to go into the history of that because people know that, or they should do some reading. And so for me, it was like, wow, you know, this movie really has caused me a lot of grief and still does me today, and yet it's still America's greatest film, which really says a lot to us about value and what we value more. And the last piece for Phil is, it isn't just you. I'm talking about the board of directors at all. Everybody on that leadership team has a relationship with someone prominent of color. And at no time that I have heard that any one of the Proctor's leadership got on the phone and said, you know what? I'm not sure about this. Let me check in with somebody that I trust or know and see what their perspective is. And so when I didn't hear that, that really caused me a lot of grief, because then it says, well, how do these people that I call business associates, colleagues, I have drinks with, what does that really say about how they value my relationship, as well as all of the other prominent people of color that they could have reached out just to test the waters before they launched?
Okay. Would any of the panelists like to respond to the multiple points? Okay.
To respond to, you raised a wealth of very sound points there, and I want to just talk a second about the Klan. The Klan surged initially in the 1860s, and then the federal government sent in the army to put down the Klan in the South. And they really died down in numbers. There were a couple of other small paramilitary groups, the Red Shirts and Knights of the White Camellia, but nothing significant. What's interesting about this film is that the Klan came back in a vengeance in response to the film. It literally, the film created history in that by portraying, particularly black men as these trembling sheep that would just quake in their boots at the sight of these white men in sheets. It glorified the Klan in a way, and in a way that Thomas Dixon later on regretted. He said he was horrified. The Klan grew strong not only in the South, but particularly out in the Midwest. It had a strong female membership in the 1920s, and it was not only anti-black, it was extremely anti-Semitic and also anti-Catholic. And Thomas Dixon would spend a number of years and go on speaking engagements trying to explain to the public that he never intended for the Klan to ever attack Catholics. Now, that shows you where he was coming from and the intent that he had and how he was portraying the Klan. Now, we all know that this notion of the Klan riding in and black men being too scared to vote is not true. Scholar after scholar, I love the work, for example, of Dr. Elsla Barkley Brown, where she did wonderful research where she showed in Richmond, Virginia, that black women who did not even have the right to vote would go to the polls with shotguns, and they would stand around the polls and cover the men to make sure that they were able to exercise their right to vote. And the community came together in just incredible ways. And so this whole representation, this is about the white imaginary. This is about the white imagination of what happens. And I'll close by saying this. What's interesting about Griffith and Dixon and their rewriting the history of the post-Civil War South is how much it allowed different parts of the nation to join into this imaginary fictional history. Even Northerners, you had in 1915, the South was, what we call the New South was on the rise, the industrial South. And you had massive amounts of Northern capital that was invested in the South because the South was rich in natural resources, oil and copper, bauxite, iron, so on. And the bankers, they wanted to see that the whites basically had suppressed and had a very docile labor force so they could invest and maximize their returns on their investments. And so this film not only played to the desire of white Southerners to feel like they were dominating the blacks during the period of the second slavery, but it also soothed Northern investors, and what it really masks, and it allowed for a white unity to come together in a place that it never should have occurred, In the South at this time, not only were the blacks going through a second slavery, but this is the period in which the white elite, the planter elite, and the white Southern businessmen, they have poor white Southern men under their heel. They are breaking the unions. They are forcing the poor whites into abject poverty. And the only thing the poor whites can take away from this film, and they do, is we may not have a dime in our pocket, we may not be able to afford to feed our kids, but we can go out and lynch some Negroes. And we can feel good about it because we're saving the nation. We're protecting the heritage of the nation. And so the film serves as a vehicle for poor white men to forget their poverty and not look at the elite as their oppressors and not see the impact of capitalism on their own lives, and to make blacks the scapegoat. And what you see periodically in American history is when you get these economic downturns, I'm not surprised that the cops are going on a killing spree of young black men given the destabilization of the American economy, because it happens periodically. Every time the economy falls out and white men can't get a job, you look to see what happens with the treatment of black men. And we go through these cycles, and Griffiths was the first one that really just kind of captured that nuance through this film.
The other point, I'm sorry, there's a question back there, but I don't, a question here first, but just to a couple of the other points, I don't want to lose this. Is there ever a justification for a film of this content to be shown? That was another point brought up. And then,
Glorification.
okay, but
Yeah.
glorified. Okay, and then that final point, before we get to that, Philip, is there a process by which you do rely on some feedback or advice of your board or others when you are going to screen a film of this nature and how it may affect groups that it might impact in the community? Is there a process, or could there be a process?
We do about 1,700 events a year, so it's broad, and we try very hard to be diverse, covering all cultures, all interests, all kinds of sensibilities. We do this at the staff level, not at the board level, and we counted on the AFI list for this particular film series. We do tons of film series. We do Iranian films, we do films from artistic to independent local. So the process is to look at and imagine an idea that we think will have value to a broad, every one of them to a niche, but altogether a broad community, and to present them. So no, the board's not involved in the selection of the process of looking at 1,700 events.
Justification for the glorification?
Absolutely none. You know, excuse me, I'm going to speak to that. I mean, glorification, it strikes me that the American Film Institute and some collection of cinema experts have said the particular set of techniques and styles from the emergence of people on the floor of the Senate there and the Assembly to whatever were worthy of considering the film important enough to be seen. Mm-hmm. To glorify any action against others is crazy. You know, it's a crazy thing. There's no glorification.
And I think what's lacking in that list is context. There's really not any transparency about why each film that's on it, whether it's Birth of a Nation or Apocalypse Now or anything else, what was the criteria for putting it on that list? At least the last time I went to that list, I didn't see it. It's just a list.
No, it's not there. It's just a list.
Okay, over here.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Rosie Calvan. I have a comment and a question. I think that the issue that has come up is a great example of how disconnected we are from each other's lives in a way that anyone would not know that it would be offensive, right, to show something like this. So I think that speaks to a lot of privilege in terms of the fact that in order to access academia, in order to access a certain level of jobs and sort of thing, you know, people of color do have to learn the ins and outs of white culture and what's offensive and what's not, and that's not necessarily the case for white folks, right? So it's very easy sometimes for people to make these kinds of mistakes and not understand the context in which we live and how things can be very insensitive to our experiences. So there was a recent example locally in Albany. I don't know if any of you heard of it. There's an art collective called The Machine on Lark Street in Albany, and one of the artists created a graphic that said Ghetto Chopper, which referenced one of the Price Choppers in Albany, and it had a pistol on it. So he couldn't understand the outburst. He couldn't understand the rage and why people were upset by that. And he kept touting the artistic freedom that comes with being an artist, and you're supposed to push buttons, et cetera, et cetera. So my question to the panelists, particularly folks in the arts and who might have gone to art school and all that stuff, is any advice on how to maintain the integrity of art and the freedom of art and the importance of that, while encouraging folks to be respectful and sensitive to really, really not funny experiences, such as living in the hood, right? There's nothing funny about that. Personally, I grew up that way, and I don't really like to be made fun of, especially when we're still experiencing issues on a daily basis, i.e. Ferguson, i.e. mass incarceration, et cetera. So any thoughts on that?
I'll say something. What I find interesting is your first point about the disconnected lives, because art should not be separate from our daily lives or experiences. And if we were conversing on a regular basis with people who aren't in our everyday circles, there'd be a broader level of understanding in that regard. So when you have an artistic show or some type of discussion or display, conversation should be part of it, a constant part. So maybe you have this list that comes out, but as artists and as art curators, understanding there's a context to every media display, that it should be a yin and a yang conversation with what's being displayed. That takes a lot of work, it's a lot of energy, but it's worth it because it respects the community that we are dealing with. And it takes the responsibility in a way out of the artist, because the artist puts their work out there. How it's received is the discourse, the back and forth.
Back to this point of privilege in society, I think that we're selectively insensitive. I think there's some groups that we're very in tune to. I think that were this a Nazi propaganda film, there might have been more care taken. I believe that that insensitivity is selective. That's my opinion, my perspective.
We have a couple of questions here.
My name is Lois Mitchell. I represent me and my husband.
Are you sure?
There's a reason. He's a little pale. And that's why I'm standing. I came to Schenectady to live because we found that our relationship was more comfortable here. What we found was this wonderful history of Schenectady and why there are so many beautiful gingerbread children in Schenectady. And I learned about the history of GE and the prosperity of this city as people came here from New York and various places, finding work at GE, and as they progressed, built their community. So why was Hamilton Hill the preferred place to live? Because it was easy to get down to GE when you were a supervisor. And then when you became a higher supervisor, you moved out to Rotterdam and got a bungalow. So I kind of learned that there was a great deal of intermingling among the people that were living here, and that benefited us because we fell in love in a different place but found that we would be most comfortable here. I was so disappointed, so personally disappointed, to know that this film would be shown without your sensitivity to the diversity of this community. So I speak to this woman's comment. Too much separation. This is an extraordinarily mixed community. Obviously, some people are not out in it sufficiently to know that. So I asked this question. What has happened has happened. What I want to know is, how do we move forward from here? Because I agree. Were this about Nazi Germany? Was this about the rise of that kind of people? There would have been a sensitivity. And I'm not just talking black and white. okay? I'm also talking Guyanese in white, Hispanic Mexican in white, Italian in black. It goes on and on. So I'm asking, what does Proctor's intend to do? Because I'm a member. I pay my money. What does Proctor's intend to do to ensure, never mind just my community, but the next community is not offended in the way that I was? I'm not even going into the Daily Gazette, whose subscription I'm about to cancel, but this theater matters to me. You are a trigger for this city. What is the plan?
I have 1, 2, 3, and then 4.
Okay,
right?
so we've got quite a few.
But let's get a response.
Okay, that will be part of concluding remarks. Philip is going to talk about future forward. Okay, so we will come to that. We're going to ask that we condense the questions because there are quite a few hands going up. So if it's a comment, please let it be really quick and right to your question.
All right. These people here are here because we are intelligent. We do not want Proctor's to be censored. We want Philip to put anything he wants on. It's up to us as individuals to have discussions like this. Thank you.
Okay. What I heard was from the audience, and I think from this panel, that we're not saying the film should not be screened. We're saying that there's a responsibility associated, and that in that process, the film should not be glorified in sensitivity to communities that may be impacted by the nature of the content. Go ahead, Gretchen.
Yeah, with two different sets of remarks, I'd like to shift the gaze of the panel and the audience. First remark is understanding fully the reaction to Birth of a Nation, that in the long history of the relationship between art and politics, and that relationship goes back to the beginning of politics and the beginning of art, there's been a tension. Okay, so what we're experiencing here, however chagrined we are, is by no, it may be special to the black condition, but it's not special to the history of art and politics at all, you know? In the last 100 years, last 75 years, you had a similar reaction to Leni Riefenstahl's brilliant Triumph of the Will, okay, one of the great films, okay, of the 20th century in a period of and reflecting deeply the ascendancy of Nazi Germany. It was about the Nuremberg rallies, okay? More recently in the state of Israel, okay, countless numbers of Israelis saying we should not listen to Richard Strauss's admittedly great music because he was virulently anti-Semitic. So again, the tension between, it's always, you know, whether it's Birth of a Nation or anything else, we're going to always have it as long as we have a politics and as long as we have an art. We're going to have this discussion about whatever piece of art or contextual politics we're talking about. We ought to keep that in mind. The second is that I have, while I don't praise the film at all, on the contrary, I have a different ambivalent take on the film. If you look at context very narrowly, let's say 1916, okay, the First World War period, the 50th anniversary of the end of the Civil War, okay? And it's fair to do that. I mean, I don't take exception to that, but that's one slice of context. If you enlarge the focus of context historically, run the arc down, let's say, to...
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to get to the question.
Okay. Is it not fair to say that that film served a very useful purpose? It may not have been intended by Dixon and Griffith, but it sharpened our sensitivity to this country to issues of race. After all, within 10 years of the film, you had the rise of the NAACP. In 20 years, the beginning of federal legislation, employment legislation, the civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. I would argue, in a subtle kind of way, impetus was given to those developments by precisely the odiousness of this kind of film. The extremism of the film sharpened the opposition to it, and we've benefited through that opposition. So I'm not praising the making of the film. I'm simply saying, taking the long contextual arc, it might be seen as serving a useful purpose.
Would any of the panelists follow?
I mean, I just want to say, with all due respect, sir, I mean, I think that's the exact type of sort of white apologist perspective that the film comes out of. And I think that one thing we have to realize is that there's a reason that the films come out I'm talking about the major films. And, you know, I would challenge you to go look at who's on the board of the AFI. Who's determining what are the classics? You know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying is that the point is that, you know, the NAACP existed. Resistance to white supremacy was already existent. We didn't need the film to have people of color move their own movement forward. No, I'm not a historian, but what my reading about is NAACP was formed and was actually led the protest against the film in Boston and New York City. We can ask the historian who seems to be in agreement with me. But again, it's so precisely, again, you know, white folks continue to want to tell people of color their history. They want to tell people how to rewrite history, which is exactly what, ironically, Birth of the Nation did. It was white folks saying, we're going to retell the beauty of the Old South, and we're going to save the legacy of white supremacy with these men marching in on hoods. Now, you know what I'm saying? My interest when I make films is to tell the stories of the people that do not have their stories told. The Hollywood machine is still run by white people. It always probably will be run by white people. It involves a lot of money. So I'm not attacking Hollywood at its core, because I have no interest. I can't match Hollywood. But I can make my own films. I know there's a lot of independent filmmakers. I've created a program for youth to make their own films, because the voices of people of color are not seen in the media. And the majority of the time when they are, they're very stereotyped. So that's my interest, you know, and I think that, I think that's a very sort of disingenuous approach to Birth of a Nation. It's a very classic approach, you know, that white folks would like to take, so.
I'm going to hit here, then over there, and then I see there's a couple of hands in the back as well. I want to hit some of the youth in the back.
Yeah, my name is Reverend Joyce Hartwell, and I'm concerned about us in the Capital Region, and I admire the work of Proctor's. We had a recent presentation on the need of arts and developing arts. My concern is people are not aware of how unequal this is. The FBI in the Capital Region put 160 young black men in prison, charging them with the RICO Act. They used their hip-hop music as evidence against them to charge them. So we have an unequal looking at art and allowing art if the art of these young people is considered criminal, but we don't consider this criminal. So.
Interesting point. Okay.
Hello, my name is Anton Riley, and I'm an employee of Proctor's. I've been here for 3 years, and I've seen it all. And I would like to say, not to give any glorification to the movie or whatever, but I'm glad this is happening. You know what I mean? Thank you for showing Birth of the Nation. Whenever you could get people to start discussing what's wrong and what's going on, you know what I mean? It's a good thing. So me being here, what I would like to say, and particularly to like African Americans, minorities, people of color, what I see here is what's going on is that every other culture supports each other. Every other culture is here bringing their artistic stuff to the theater. With blacks in this community, and I'm not from here, but like I've been here a while, I see that the people are not coming together and bringing their side of the story. They're not bringing their artistic things. So what I would like to see is more of the gathering of minorities to bring their own thing. And yes, you know, like one of the ladies was saying, I think it was you, there is a disconnect, you know, and black people recognize that you're also disconnected to their culture. There's things of their culture you don't understand, you know. So me being here for 3 years, seeing what happens here, I've been here trying to change things, trying to bring people in that never been here before to see the theater. It only seems that people come to the theater is when it's related to church. Not all minorities are Christians. So start bringing your own culture here, and maybe we'll see things start to change for Proctor's. That's all I want to say. And Philip Morris, I respect Philip Morris. He respects my ideals. He asks me about things all the time. You know, maybe we need to, like I said once again, like start telling them more about us. Who I represent, I represent Rasta, Selassie. A lot of people don't know about that, you know? So, I mean, I'm glad to see the African American community coming together and having this discussion, and that's all I want to say.
I gotta
In
give
the
this
back,
guy.
I
Give him
know
a hand.
there's
Give him
been
a
a
hand.
hand.
Give him a hand.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I had this hand up, and then I'm running to the back.
Hi, I'm Josie. I actually was here for the filming, and I was really thankful that they did go forward and show it. I actually never thought of it as a glorification at all. For me, it was more learning more about the history and being exposed to the horrific stuff that was put out there that we don't always know about, you know? And glorification, I guess, you know, yeah, I can see how that would be interpreted that way because it is Americans, you know, the AFI 100. But I looked at it more as, let me see this and let me see the horrific portrayals that were done then and get an understanding of, you know, 100 years ago, this is where things got sent back to, you know, and for me it was more of a matter of learning and you know, seeing it rather than just hearing about it or reading about it. So, you know, and I was thrilled when I heard, I think, from Paul that this was happening. I was really excited, and I actually put aside something else to be here tonight. I'm really thankful to have this be an outcome.
Thank you. In the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, my name is Brother Youssef, and I work with a lot of young people. I just want to respond to something that was just said. I look at the separation of art and the context, and I see a lot of young folks who are in the music industry who, because of economics, can't get their beats or their kind of music across because they're slam dunked by certain big money, so they can't really express what they want to express, but what's expressed is a sense of buffoonism. I see that often. I was just riding through New York City and heard about Nicki Minaj wanting to go to her own high school. They denied her to go to the high school. Not that I totally agree with that, but I could understand what impression she was going to be able to give to young folks in that high school that they didn't want to have pushed forward. There's things like that. So it's the economics that separates a lot. Some chances are done. I'm reading now Khalil Muhammad's Condemnation of Black, and it's real that for a long time things like this have been done subtly, overtly, but it's the economics that makes us able to express ourselves or not express ourselves. There are a lot of young rappers who are dying to say something different, but because of economics, have to give it away the way they get it. And it's real.
We have time for about 2 more questions, so I'm going to take this one and then back here.
Hello. My name is Olivia, and I'm currently a student at Schenectady County Community College. And I originally grew up in, does everybody know where Guilderland is? I originally grew up there from about 2 years old until I was 18. And I went through a lot growing up because there is such a saying as 2 black for white kids and 2 white for black, and 2 white for, right, sorry. And that has been a struggle 90% of my life. I'm about to be 21 in 2 months, and seeing all of this continue to go on, it kind of makes me question, do we want to keep going forward, or do we keep wanting to ignore it and go backwards? And growing up in an environment where I didn't know a lot about my background, it was extremely tough for me. Certain girls did not like how I used to dress, how I used to wear my hair, and they would tease me about those certain things. And when I started to get my feet wet and come to school here, I started to feel more comfortable with my background and everything, because both of my parents grew up in Guyana, so I was able to explore more with my cultural background, and I've been many, many times. And now that a film like this is existent, I think it's extremely important that a lot of people take notice to this, because this is something that people need to recognize.
Thank you.
Can I ask Deidre just to kind of respond to this young woman, just because you are a faculty right here in her little city?
Respond in a way that's affirming and supporting of her in her academic or in life journey. very much so. Continue learning and having conversations with people that are different from you or same from you. Educate those who possibly hurt you in the past. You know, when you learn something, you teach something to the next generation. It's a cycle. So our conversation isn't just for the benefit of us in this room, it's for us to keep the dialogues going. Because what's going on politically in the news is important, but also the conversations in our own family. I mean, I empathize with you. Thank you, Gretchen, for putting me on the spot in that regard.
You know I'll do it.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
And we can talk after this as well.
We're going to take this last question, and there is a reception. We will all be hanging out for the reception. That's why we're having it, because sometimes you don't want to share publicly. But I will take this last question right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Gustavo Santos, and I'm a citizen. I want to thank Mr. Newell for being here that day with us when they showed the film. He should have been part of that panel there. Also, Maria Pacheco. There was about 5 of us that came here that day to rally and had a couple of signs. And that's why we're having this event today. I also sent an email the next day to the CEO of Proctor's, asking him why this film was put on in Schenectady, and also the board of directors, how much diversity he has in the board of directors. He sent me an email back, but he did not answer the question about how many people of color he has in his board of directors. As a result, he told me that he wanted to have a dialogue with the people here in the community. But the only reason why this dialogue happened is because of Mr. Newell and because of Maria Pacheco. So I want you to give them a hand for being here that day. Sir, as a representative of Proctor's, I would like you to answer the question that I directed to the CEO of Proctor's.
I am the CEO of Proctor's. I believe I answered your question, which was we immediately, upon realizing from Neville that they're first and others, it was a Thursday, I believe, might have been Wednesday, before the Monday showing of the film, that there was a need for a conversation. We looked at whether we could pull such a conversation together reasonably well by Monday, and chose that and decided we didn't think we could. We chatted and talked with Neville as he arrived for the first performance, and he was also there for the second, and talked about engaging him in a conversation that would happen with the showing of D.W. Griffith's second film on the AFI 100, which happens in January, I think the 24th. And he said that would work. In fact, today we met to talk about how we proceed to that. The colleges came forward and said we would like to organize something that would happen faster. We were happy to do that, and tonight's event is happening because of it. A conversation and a dialogue is what we believe our job is in our community, and we're happy to do it. We missed the opportunity to do it before, yes, but we're not missing the opportunity to continue it.
And the other question, Philip, was about the board diversity. Were you interested in a particular form of diversity? Are you asking about the racial ethnic composition, gender?
The racial, how many people of color?
Okay.
The board of directors, how many Hispanics, how many African Americans, how many Guyanese?
I actually am not certain that I know. I know we have one African American. I do not know the background of everybody else on that board.
Okay. Thank you. How are we for time, Gretchen? Okay.
There's a young person right there.
There's a young person. We'll just take the one more from our future Very important that we get their voice, our present and our future.
Hi, my name is Aiden Suchek, and my dad, although I don't think that, I shouldn't have said that. It's okay. But I'm a senior at Albany High School, and some of you may have seen on the news recently that something happened over social media, and this year our senior class president is a...
You turned it on.
Slide it sideways.
And so what happened on social media after the elections happened and a black girl was elected president is there was a lot of some very, I guess, subversively racist comments that were made over Twitter, and so she reported some stuff, and there's been people who have been talking about it, and it resulted in the suspensions of some of these kids. And I guess for me, what it really did is outline how segregated the school is. Although it is a melting pot, and there's 2,400 kids there, and they come from everywhere. They come from like 50 different countries, and there's a lot of, and when I walk down the halls, I see all sorts of types of people, and for me, that's amazing. But when you go into the classrooms and when you go into the lunchrooms, you see how segregated it is. And so my question for you guys is, how do we kind of educate people who aren't necessarily in tune to people of color's society? How do we educate them and kind of move forward? Because I feel like we need to kind of teach people that some of these things are wrong. I mean, a kid in particular tweeted something where he was going to, he made a joke about blackface, and this is a white kid, and it was super, super, like, I mean, obviously very racist, and it was indirectly kind of targeting the class president. And so I just want to know, like, from you guys, what do you think, how do you think that we can educate, especially my generation, how can we educate and have these conversations to stop, not necessarily even stop the segregation, because I feel like that's just inherent in the society at this point, but how do we at least educate people to understand the perspectives of black people and the perspective of people of color when these kind of things happen?
A very good question. I'll start, and I'll say I think there needs to be a visitation of what is the new paradigm for protests. What is the new model for movement? I would argue that the economic impact is really key and important, because when you start messing with people's money, you'll find that they'll step up and really respond. So that is one path to use. And then there's the power of the collective. Everyone in this room tonight, you've all empowered me, and I hope you feel empowered that the conversation certainly does not end here, but it is actually launched here. So I would say the power of the collective and the acknowledgement that you have to go after the purse strings, that's the new power, that's the new paradigm for protests. Others?
And even on another level, we have to feel comfortable being uncomfortable, and being around people we don't know, and not make the assumptions all the time. We know everything about someone by the way they look, talk, walk, get to know people on a personal level. Again, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy. But your generation, I mean, we are very connected, and then we're very disconnected, right, with all the social media. Take the time to feel uncomfortable and talk to somebody new. And that kind of breaks up why we all sit together in the lunchroom, because you're around people that you think are like you, and you're afraid to be the only one, the outlier. It takes a lot of courage to be different, and even as adults. So teenagers go through it in a very succinct way, but for the rest of your lives, we are more segregated by choice now in our neighborhoods than we were pre-1950, 55, 65. We're making a choice. Redlining was done by insurance companies and real estate companies. Now it's, I want to live in this place because I think more people are like me. Instead of saying, why don't I have some neighbors that look a little different, may have different styles than me? And that hits to the purse strings and everything else, but politically. But feeling uncomfortable, I think you need to think about being uncomfortable sometimes.
But those segregated classrooms that you referenced, those are structural racism. And there within lies a difference between self-selecting into AP and honors. That's that continuation of tracking that is very structurally embedded in America's education system. So.
And I just want to kind of piggyback off of what Deirdre was saying. When you talked about choice, I think that one of the myths of America is that we want to believe that racism can be eradicated by education. But a lot of the persistence of racism is precisely because of personal choice. There are people sitting in this room, we could hold this conversation for another 2 or 3 hours, and they will still not hear what is being said. And they will turn this into something else other than what's being said. Because there's something about racism in which the hearing of another person's humanity gets shut off like a light switch. And the same person that can be incredibly intuitive and notice every detail about a sporting event, when it comes to race, the light switch goes off.
Okay. So we're
Go
ahead, Phil.
Add something though.
Go ahead, Philip.
And you inspired me to say this. I would rather that you, especially at your age, not assume that segregation is a permanent part of our society. I would rather say that what we have to learn by listening and by talking and by working together and by doing things together has the potential to eliminate segregation. And if it takes 500 years, okay, but if you don't believe it, it will never happen.
I'd like to take this opportunity to do one last thing. It's to thank Shea Butler and I are chief diversity officers at our colleges. So we hold these dialogues all the time on our majority white campuses with diverse audiences, and we're used to this. But Shea kind of took the lead on this and helped us to find faculty. So let's give Dr. Shea Butler a hand. I'd also like to say, and I want to thank folks who were very honest with their feelings. Proctor's could have just shut it down and not had this conversation. So I'd also like to take some time to thank Phil for offering the opportunity to have this conversation. And now I'm turning it back to Shea.
Okay. We thought we'd end with just some closing reflections for each of the panelists to add to the discussion, and then Philip is going to close us out, and we'll move into the reception area. Bowen, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to have the conversation, and I can listen to you lecture about history all day long, so I'm going to look up your classes and audit one of them. But I just want to say that, as somebody that's a person of color, you grow up always having conversations about race because you have to, because it's part of your history, because it's survival. And I think that is really important for, and I think this is echoing something that people have said, and in the audience, to make yourselves uncomfortable and have those conversations, because it's a very important time, I believe, in our history, because I feel like things are just revealing themselves to be what they actually are, and we have to seize this opportunity to be uncomfortable and be brave enough to have these conversations in schools, out of schools, and places like this. And on that note, I just want to do a little bit of, just announce that next Wednesday on December 3rd, my film, The Throwaways, is going to be screening at Spectrum Theater, and I think that what I've really seen in the conversation, and the film has a question and answer afterwards, because it's a very visceral film, and it's so important to have the conversation afterwards. So I hope folks can come join. There's some cards out in the lobby. And part of what I've really been incredibly inspired by is in those conversations is that there's a lot of hope, and there are a lot of people that are engaged in this fight for justice and for racial justice. And I think that all of us, in this room, by just coming here, you're participating, and tonight, is going to be a historic night, whether we like it or not, because there's going to be a verdict in what has become sort of an epicenter of a mass movement against police brutality in this country. And so, in some ways, I think, I've just sort of been, I'm on the text alert for the Ferguson verdict, so I've been waiting, but I haven't heard anything. So I just think it's important for people to be aware that this is important for us to be having these conversations, and I want to thank you guys and Proctor's for, allowing me to be a part of that.
I too echo that. Thank you, Proctor's, and for the organizers, or the main organizers of this panel, this conversation. I don't think the conversation ends here. I think we should keep on talking and use our public spaces. If anything, this tells you the power of us to say, this is a community
institution, we want our voices to be heard, and there's a response. So I think this is a bright thing. Instead of a feeling of maybe there was a slight tone of kind of bashing proctors for not being proactive, but we're having the discussion now. So we are moving forward with this. And my comments previously about the choice of being self-selective is definitely embedded in the structures that be. But I argue there's always agency in the structures. We're not just mandated by, this is where our educational system is, this is where our neighborhoods are. We have choices to make that different and to make it the way we want it to. So I'm extremely hopeful by having continual conversations like this about topics as relevant as Ferguson, but as other ones that are happening right here, like at Albany High, that we should be talking to each other and take some time to listen. So I'm very grateful for having this opportunity to talk with you tonight.
I too am grateful, and I would really like to acknowledge the brother mentioned earlier, Neville, for starting a petition that launched this protest and conversation. I would like to thank the petitioners, the picketers who came out the night of the event for showing up, you know, and saying no. Even if we stand alone, we're going to stand for what's right. And you might have been few, but your voices were heard. And I just want you to know that and continue to fight on. I want to thank others in this audience who have been a part of tonight. Sandy Powell, I'm very aware of your advocacy. Others, Hector, who spoke tonight. And I want to thank my husband, Odo Butler, who's been very supportive. And because this is very stressful. This type of work can be very, very stressful. And I am grateful, too, that I work at the College of St. Rose, and I have a president who, when I immediately brought this to her attention, said, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? And you go ahead and take the lead, and I have your back. And you need that to do this type of work. And I'm grateful for that. And as well as Dr. Ainley, who also stepped up and rose to the occasion. So hats off to St. Rose and to Union. And thank all of you for coming out this evening.
This is a really hard conversation that we're having, and it's not over. I want to echo that, and again, like everyone else has done, thank you all for being here because it's hard. But I also want to ask you to continue something and to do a few things, and that's put yourself in new situations. Put yourself in a place of discomfort. And when you feel it, ask yourself why you're feeling that way. And when somebody tells you that they're hurt by something, try to listen with an open mind and an open heart. And recognize your own privilege. Many of us have a lot of privileges. Some of us only have a couple. But there's so many different kinds of them. But examine them. Ask yourself questions. Keep the dialogue going. Thanks a lot for being here.
Well, as a historian, I'm always thinking about dead people because, you know, we look backwards. And I want to thank a lot of the white Southerners from the 19th century who left documents and made public statements that have allowed today's historians to go back and correct the record. I love reading the work of Stephen Hahn, where he's quoting the white Southerners during Reconstruction, making statements like, these people, they come out of the fields and they understand politics. We must stop them. They know which political offices to go after in order to protect their land so they can't be evicted. I love the work of Eric Foner, who went document by document to show that the political changes made by those newly elected legislators during Reconstruction were the most democratic passages of law that the South had ever seen. They protected the rights of poor farmers, of widows who previously had not been allowed to keep inheritances from their husbands that used to be thrown off of their family's land. You know, so we know a lot more about the attempt to actually exercise democracy because of those dead folks who fought valiantly and who spoke. And I think that what amazes me when I think about this film is how comfortable the whites were in 1915 watching their own people be misrepresented in this film because the lie was more comfortable to deal with than the truth. And one good thing about having this kind of conversation, it allows us to talk about what is actually true and to realize that we can't learn the history from the film, but we can learn how the film manipulated and attempted to represent history in a way that has no foundation. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you, too, for all coming. Clearly, we are committed to working with all of our community. We do so now. We'll do so more aggressively and regularly. We do so with working with young people in both high schools. We'll continue to work with Anton and his hip-hop program. We're going to continue to try to do the best we can to reach out, connect, and do right by our whole community. And I invite you all for a small reception, and please hug somebody you don't know when you're out there.
We are planning future conversations in partnership with Proctor's. Your evaluation forms tonight will help inform us on what those topics should be. And if you